In this video, I'm going to talk about one of the most difficult illusions to overcome for avatars. It really was something that required a lot of groveling on my own part to come to terms with this. And I know that what I'm going to talk about here can seem a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're new to these teachings, because they're so different from most other spiritual teachings out there that it can take some time to really integrate and absorb them. So if you feel overwhelmed, step back, take some time. But I would encourage you also, if you feel this is important for you, look at the books. I've talked about the My Lives book as a good introduction, but there's also this one, Healing Your Spiritual Traumas, which is it's a workbook. So there's exercises in there that help you integrate the teachings in the book. And the teachings are very profound about the birth trauma and these cells that we created after we came to Earth. So what I'm going to talk about here is something that came to me after several years of having received these teachings about avatars and the birth trauma. It's kind of like when I first got these teachings about the avatars and realized I'm an avatar, I thought, okay, so my psychological hang-ups all came from this birth trauma. Now, I came to Earth, I was kind of a blank slate, I was an innocent being, and I came here with the best of intentions, then I received this birth trauma, and then I created all these separate cells, and that explains my psychology. But when I started clearing out these separate cells and dealing with the primal self, I started to see that that wasn't the full explanation, that wasn't the full understanding. There was more to know about it. I wasn't entirely a blank slate when I came to Earth, because I had a certain view of life, a certain view of myself, a certain approach to life from a natural planet. And the reason why I came to Earth, or that I, in the outer mind, so to speak, decided to come to Earth, was that I had a certain view of Earth. And I found the same to be true for many other avatars, of course. There's a reason why we came here. In a sense, we realized that this wasn't a natural planet. We didn't fully realize how different it was, but we realized it was going to be, it was not going to be that easy, it was not going to be comfortable. And as I've said several times, we didn't come here to have fun here on Earth. We came here to do some work. But this is also an attitude. This is what I started realizing. This is actually a way of looking at Earth. And what I very quickly came to see was that I actually had the attitude that something had gone wrong on Earth. And if you had asked me about this 10, 20, 30 years ago, and asked me, do you think something has gone wrong on Earth? I would have said, absolutely. And why? Because there's suffering on Earth. And people shouldn't be suffering. Suffering is wrong. So something must have gone wrong on Earth. And I have, throughout my life, I've seen this in various ways. You know, my first spiritual movement explained it one way, my second spiritual movement explained it another way, and later I started getting teachings from the Ascended Master that explained it in a broader way, more profound way. But I still maintained in my mind this attitude that something has gone wrong, and if I can just understand what has gone wrong, maybe I can help change it, remove the cause of what has gone wrong. And of course, this is not a new concept, of course. You find this concept in even the Judeo-Christian tradition, where you have Genesis that talks about the Garden of Eden and how Adam and Eve made a mistake. They ate the forbidden fruit and they were cast out of paradise. You find the same in many other religions of a lost paradise. You find it in New Age teachings. And even the Ascended Master teachings of my second spiritual movement, they very much talk about like this. There's something has gone wrong. People have gone into this state of consciousness, and they have created all this karma, misqualified energy, and all of this, taken on all these illusions. You have the whole concept in Buddhism of Maya, or illusion. And so you can very easily interpret all of these teachings that something has gone fundamentally wrong on Earth. But what did I say in my last video? I said that the biggest challenge for avatars coming to Earth is to deal with free will. So if you take what I said there about free will, that it must be free, what could have gone wrong? How could anything have gone wrong on Earth? I mean, seriously, this question hit me one day like somebody had slapped me in the face, and I couldn't let it go. I had to really ponder it, and it took me a while. I did the usual thing. I asked the masters to help me see it, and then after a while I just put it aside, and gradually I gained more and more insight in it. And one day I just realized, wow, nothing has gone wrong. Nothing has gone wrong. And it was like a shock, because all of my life, probably for many, many lifetimes since I came to Earth, I had been in this mode. Something has gone wrong, and I'm here to help correct it. But you realize, when you think about this, you realize that if God has given beings free will, and if the Creator is allowing free will to outplay itself, then what could have gone wrong? I mean, whatever you see on Earth is a result of choices that people, self-aware beings, have made. And if you think about free will, you realize that free will must be free, meaning there can't be any restrictions. I mean, the Creator can't, on the one hand, give people free will, and on the other hand say, but there's a limit to what they can do with that free will. Then it's not free will. If there is a limitation for what you can do with your free will, it's not free will. Now, the fallen beings would immediately object to this, because they would say there are limitations to what you can do with your free will. Because you can do something that has consequences. You can make a mistake and it puts you in a wheelchair for the rest of your life, or it kills you and takes you out of embodiment. In other words, the fact that you make karma by making choices restricts your free will. That's what the fallen beings would say, because they believe that they should be allowed to do anything they want without reaping the consequences. And this was something that it took me a while to contemplate, and I realized, and I have talked about this before, I mentioned it before, but it's relevant here, that if your choices didn't have consequences, how would you know you have made a choice? I used the analogy before. You're walking down a road in a forest, dense forest on both sides. You come to a point where the road divides, two forks. So you can choose to go right or you can choose to go left. But if you go left, all you see is the trees, and then after a while, all of a sudden you come back where the road becomes one again. If you choose to go right, all you see is trees, and then you still come to that same point. So, yeah, technically you made a choice to go right or to go left, but the experience you had of going right or left was exactly the same, and you ended up in the same place. So did you really make a choice? Because there was no difference in the consequences of the choice. So was it really a choice? So you realize here that when you think about this, that the world we live in is a world of form. Everything has form. Now, we are co-creators. This is what we're designed to do. So how do we co-create? We formulate an image in our minds. We project this image onto the base energy, which I've called the matter light in my videos about how the world was created. And then the matter light takes on form, not just by one person, but collectively here on Earth. We have projected images onto the matter light, and that's why we see many of the forms we do. Now, some of them were created by the Elohim, as I've explained, but nevertheless, the point is, we formulate an image in our minds, we project that image out from our minds, and the physical circumstances we encounter are a reflection of the image we projected out. So, if we could project out an image and there was nothing coming back, how would we have made a choice? How would that be free will? So you realize, first of all, that the fact that people receive back what they are projecting out is not a limitation of free will. It's actually the only way free will can be exercised. If there was no consequences, you are not exercising free will. Then, of course, you can also realize that there is a limitation to free will in the sense that we can only formulate a mental image if we can imagine that image. We can't formulate an image we can't imagine. So we can't co-create something, we can't project something out if we can't imagine it. But that's not really a limitation of free will, that's a limitation of our state of consciousness. And this is another aspect you realize, that the consequence of free will, that it is free, is that we are not only co-creating by projecting something out onto the matter light, we are co-creating by creating our own sense of self. As I've said, we can either be connected beings and seek to increase our connection, or we can go into separation. And when we go into separation, we very much limit what we can imagine, what we can see. Because what we have done in separation, as I've explained over and over again, we take one particular dualistic extreme, we elevated that to the status of being absolute, and now we limit our imagination to that framework, to that paradigm, as they sometimes call it. So as an example, let's say that you are a Christian, you decide to go into the whole Christian mindset, that Christianity is the only true religion. All of a sudden, your whole mindset is geared towards validating that Christianity is the only true religion. So there are certain questions you are not willing to consider. Anything that questions the validity or the superiority of the Christian religion, you don't want to consider those questions. So this limits your imagination, what you can actually imagine projecting out. And that means that, as I've said, your mind becomes a closed system, a self-referential system, which means you continue to project onto the matter light the same images. You can't really change them if you are not willing to correct or to change or question your paradigm, what you see as the absolute truth. And this is why the fallen beings are complaining about free will, because they, of course, are doing the same thing, but they have been doing it for much longer than we have. They have been doing it for a very long time, so they are absolutely unwilling to question their basic paradigm. And that's why they keep projecting the same thing out, they keep getting the same thing back, and that's why they either question free will or they say that free will was a mistake by God, because free will was suffering, leads to suffering, and it can even lead to self-destruction. So, once I started contemplating that, I realized that a lot of the misconceptions about free will actually come from the fallen beings. Because they want to be allowed to exercise free will without any restrictions. In other words, they think that free will means there's no consequences. But as I've said, then you're not making choices, right? You can't actually make a choice if there's no consequence. So, but what the fallen beings also want to do, they want to control humanity. And they want to control us as avatars. So they want people to deny free will, or to think that it was a mistake that God gave them free will. And therefore they are seeking to get all of us to deny free will, or to see free will as a problem. And they have projected there are certain fallen beings. Again, they are not one uniform. There are many different groupings of fallen beings, but there's a certain group of fallen beings that have projected that free will was God's mistake. God made a mistake by giving beings free will. And they used the excuse that it leads to suffering and this and that. And for a while on the spiritual path, I actually thought the same thing. I didn't really formulate it that clearly, but I thought obviously there must have been some mistake. So wouldn't it be easier if people didn't have free will? And what the fallen beings mean with this when they say this is not that they want God to restrict people's free will. They actually want to restrict people's free will so they can control them. And they are, in a sense, some of them are even so delusional that they hope that by getting people to abuse their free will and self-destruct, they can prove to God that he was wrong for giving them free will. And it's not that God will take away people's free will, it's that he will put the fallen beings in charge of the universe so that they can control people's free will, and therefore they can supposedly force people to be saved. Like I've talked about in some of my videos, you can't force people to raise their consciousness. It has to be a voluntary act. And that's again why free will has to be free. So what the fallen beings are really saying, is they long ago chose to go against the process of co-creation. And what is the process of co-creation? It is, I formulate an image in my mind, I project it out, then when the response comes back from the matter light, the cosmic mirror, other people, however you want to see it, but the response comes back, then my chance is to say, do I like that response or don't? In other words, do I want more of the same response or do I want more than that response? And if I want more of the same, then I don't have to change my mind. I just keep projecting through the same mental image and I'll get more of the same back. But if I want more than that, if I don't like what came back, then I need to look at myself and say, okay, I need to refine my mental image. I need to change the mental image through which I'm projecting. That's co-creation in a nutshell. When you see yourself as a connected being. But when you go into separation, you deny this. Now you are thinking not only that you are separated from your source, your higher self or God, you are separated from other people or separated from your environment. No. You are separated from yourself. In other words, your mental images. You are not realizing that what comes back to you from the universe is your own mental images that you're projecting out. Instead, you are projecting that what comes to you at the universe, your outer conditions, is caused by external circumstances, external causes. So in other words, why did this happen to me? God did it. Other people did it. Nature did it. The laws of nature did it. There's always something outside yourself. So the very essence of the fallen mindset, which they have now repeated, as I've explained, through several spheres, is this denial, this refusal to look at yourself and say, if I want to change what I'm experiencing and the circumstances I face, I need to change myself. I need to look at myself and change myself. And so this is the purpose of free will, is that we look at ourselves. We can project out anything we want. But by looking at what comes back, we can then say, okay, let me refine what I'm projecting out. Let me choose to project something different. When you refuse to do that, you are refusing to exercise your free will. You are essentially saying, I don't have free will. I have to do this. I can't do anything else but this. This is what the fallen beings are saying. They're on a track and they can only keep going. And that's what I've talked about. This is the school of hard knocks, where you're not listening for the connection. You're not using the connection to your higher self and the ascended masters to say, help me see what I can't see here. You're continuing on the same track. You can only keep doing the same thing and making it more and more extreme. And in the school of hard knocks, it is just a matter of how hard do the knocks have to become before you've had enough and say, oh, I can't do this anymore. When you are a connected being, you are essentially saying, oh, I didn't like what is coming back. I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. But when you go into the separation, you are saying, I can't do anything else but this, until you get to such an extreme point where you say, I can't do this anymore. There must be something else. And that's the school of hard knocks. So that's what the fallen beings are in. They want everybody else to be in it. But in order to justify them being in it, they're coming up with all of these explanations. As I've said, when you receive this trauma, you have to explain it so you can live with it. And the fallen beings, because they are not willing to look at themselves, they have to come up with all of these explanations for why they don't have to look at themselves. And some of these explanations are based on this idea: God made a mistake. Something went wrong with God's creation. And so now you can take Earth, which we have all done as avatars. We've come here, we're exposed to this cosmic birth trauma, and it was extremely shocking. And I'm not in any way trying to minimize this. It was extremely shocking. And of course, it was, in a sense, wrong what happened to us, because the fallen beings clearly violated our free will. So in a sense, you could say, this shouldn't have happened. And so now we have created this primal self that is based on this hurt. And we are constantly acting on this hurt, and we are trying to come up with an explanation so we can live with the hurt. And that's why we easily get pulled into this mindset: something went wrong. Obviously something went wrong, otherwise I shouldn't be hurting like I'm hurting. And if I could just understand what went wrong and correct it, then I could overcome the hurt. And this is the major challenge. Because what are we doing? We are projecting the cause is outside ourselves. Even if we could find an external cause and correct that cause, it wouldn't remove the hurt, because the hurt is inside ourselves. This took me a long time to get and fully accept this. And I've talked about it in one of my breakthrough videos where I said that nobody ever did anything to you. And it's actually correct. The fallen beings didn't do anything to me. Yes, they did something outer. They did something to my physical body. They did something to my emotional body, to my mental body, to my identity body. That's correct, they did. But who am I? I am the conscious you. I am pure awareness, which means I am not the contents of my identity body, the separate cells in my identity body. I am not the separate cells in my mental body. I am not the separate cells in my emotional body, and I am not my physical body. So I haven't been hurt by the fallen beings. I was exposed to an outer situation by the fallen beings. I chose, in reaction to that situation, to create separate selves in my emotional, mental, and identity body. And those selves are hurting. I'm not minimizing the hurt here. I'm not trying to come up with some idea that, oh, you can just shift your perspective and the hurt will go away. That's not what I'm saying. Because the hurt is there, the separate self is there, they're based on illusion, there's tremendous fear-based energy there. And as I've explained, in order to get free of it, you have to transform the energy, which is why you invoke light from the Ascended Masters. You have to come to see the illusion, let the illusion go. So I'm not trying to say here you can just shift, right? I'm not trying to minimize the hurt because it's there and it is affecting us. But what I am saying is that when you come to accept this, you realize the fallen beings didn't cause the hurt. And what's the magic of doing this? It is, I can overcome the hurt, and my overcoming the hurt does not depend on the fallen beings or humankind. In other words, I don't have to change anything outside myself in order to overcome the hurt inside myself and be at peace inside myself. Because I can look at the structures I've created in my own mind, remove those structures with the help of the Ascended Masters, and I can be free of the hurt. That's the magic of it. Because as long as you are projecting that the cause is outside yourself, then first of all you have to discover that cause, and then you have to change it, which invariably means changing other people. And that is disempowering. You are making yourself powerless to change the hurt. You can't overcome the hurt if you think the cause is outside yourself. And so you could say, what are we here for as avatars? We're here to demonstrate what I just talked about. That regardless of what has happened on earth, regardless of how conditions are on earth, it's not the outer conditions that are hurting us, it's our inner reaction to them, and we can take command over those inner reactions, change them, and thereby escape the hurt. We can escape everything that's happened on earth, anything that has happened on earth, anything the fallen beings have done to us. This is what we're here to demonstrate so that the original inhabitants can see this exemplified, demonstrated. So they can see that we were just like them, we are in embodiment just like them, and we have overcome it, so they start thinking, well, can I then too? And this is what you do see in today's world, that many, many more people are beginning to work on psychology. I mean, when I was a child, going to a psychologist, it was just unthinkable. I mean, you had to be carried there in a straitjacket. Today, people regularly talk about, my therapist said this, or my therapy group, or this or that. So it's become almost mainstream, at least in some countries, to go to therapy and work with yourself, read self-help books and this kind of thing. So we are having an impact as avatars, but we can of course have a greater impact by becoming more conscious of this, by walking this path, dedicating ourselves to walking this path, and come to the point where you can say, I understand why you're hurting. I used to feel the same way, but this is what I did to overcome it. Okay, so back to the topic here. Did God make a mistake by giving beings free will? Well, first of all, as I've explained in my other videos, the universe is a school to educate creators. In order to educate a creator, in order for us to start with this point-like sense of identity and expand it to the creator consciousness, we have to start in some kind of environment. There has to be an environment that's made for us. And we can exercise our free will within that environment. And then by going through this process I've described, looking at what comes back, changing what we are projecting out, we gradually expand our awareness. And in order to really, for this process to be completed, free will has to be allowed to outplay itself. And it's like, if free will wasn't free, how could we grow to the creator consciousness? Because the creator has total freedom to choose what kind of a world or form it wants to create. But it also has experience with what makes a world or form work and grow, and what makes it self-destruct. So it has to have both kind of experiences, what works, what doesn't work. And you could say that on a planet like Earth, yes, there is terrible suffering, but it demonstrates what doesn't work. And then you could say, well, yeah, but God must have learned that lesson a long time ago, or the Ascended Masters must have learned that long ago, or I Am Presence has learned that a long time ago. So why is there still suffering? Well, again, free will is free, right? You can't just say, yeah, sorry, conscious you, I've learned what I wanted to learn from you, I'm withdrawing you. You send the conscious you out, you have to give it freedom to go into any experience it wants, at least within very wide boundaries. So you may say, I mean, there is an ultimate outcome, as I've explained. There can come a point where the vast majority of the beings in an unascended sphere have chosen to ascend, and there may be a little group of people that beings that haven't, and so you can't hold the entire sphere back because of the few. So there may be some limitations by the fact that we are not the only ones. I am not the only being in the universe, so therefore I can't exercise my free will as if I was the only being, or the only being that mattered. But the fallen beings are essentially trying to do is exercise their free will in an unrestricted way so that all other beings on their planet become their slaves. And that's of course not free will either. So again, there has to be some kind of a balance. That's why I'm saying, free will, it is a challenge, it is a complex topic, but when we come to realize just these basic things I've talked about here, we can realize that nothing actually went wrong on Earth. We can also, for me, it was important to have this concept that we live in an unascended sphere. And that means that nothing here is permanent, which means that no matter how much hurt we have been exposed to on a planet like Earth, we can overcome it. It will be transformed eventually. And we can, and this was another breakthrough for me to realize that we could never make a choice with our free will that we can't overcome by making another choice. And this is one of the lies that the fallen beings have also projected out there, that it's possible to make a choice that you can never overcome by yourself, by making your own choices. You take the concept again of Genesis, the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve, they make a choice to eat that forbidden fruit. But now, not only are they cast out, but all the rest of us are cast out of paradise, and we can't get back on our own. We can only get back by some external savior. And this is again one of these very subtle topics, because there's reality and there's unreality. But the way the fallen beings will present it is that they made a choice that they couldn't overcome or free themselves from by making another choice. They need something outside to save them. And the fallen beings are always the ones who try to set themselves up that they are the saviors of humankind. That's what they've been doing ever since they came to Earth. In a sense, you could say one group of fallen beings create a problem, and another group of fallen beings present themselves as the saviors who can save people from the problem. That's the way they seek to control people. So anyway, the forbidden fruit is a symbol for the duality consciousness, the separation. Once you go into it, as I've said, your mind becomes a closed, self-validating system. You can't get out of it by thinking. You can't get out of it by using the dualistic mind. So therefore, you do need something from outside the dualistic mind, which is the Christ mind, the one mind. But this is not the outside savior, where Jesus is going to come back and save us all. That's, again, the fallen being's misrepresentation. But it is that we again have the potential as the conscious you to disassociate from the separate self long enough that we can contact the Christ consciousness, our I am presence, or the ascended masters, and receive some insight that helps us see one illusion take the next step up. So, yes, we do need something from outside the dualistic mind, but we have the power, the free will to choose to connect to that one mind, the Christ mind, our higher selves. And we can make that choice at any time. This is what the fallen beings want us to deny. So, when I started understanding all of this, grasping all of this, I realized, again, nothing has actually gone wrong here. We have this entire enormous universe with billions of planets that are natural planets, that are in an upward spiral. Earth is just one of these few places that isn't a natural planet, and where the kind of consciousness we see on Earth is being allowed to outplay itself, and therefore we have the suffering. And once I realized that this is not actually because free will is a mistake. It's just that free will is free, and therefore it must be allowed to outplay itself. And I am here to provide an alternative, to show, as I said, that no matter what choice you have made, you can be free of that choice by making a more aware choice. That's why we're here as avatars. Or at least it's one way to describe why we're here. And I realized that by projecting in my mind that something went wrong, I'm not really actually helping to improve the situation. And this was a difficult one for me because I think most avatars will find the same thing. We have a tendency to be what they call empath. We have empathy with the suffering of people. So I remember a very young child, and I was watching on television, when television was black and white. There was a country in Africa called Biafra. It doesn't exist anymore, West Africa. And there was a hunger there, famine. And they show pictures on TV of these 3 or 4-year-old children, who were basically like skeletons, but had this huge belly full of air. And I just, couldn't fathom how children like me could be exposed to this kind of a situation. And the world didn't do anything. Well, the world eventually did something about it, but, that the world allowed this to happen. I couldn't understand it. Because I had that empathy, and throughout my life I had this empathy. In fact, it was my biggest problem in my life was I had all this empathy with people, so I felt like, oh, this is a problem. I need to focus my attention on that. I need to pour my energy into it and this and that. And then this just led to frustration in my childhood because what can you do about it, But I had this sense that I couldn't just ignore other people's suffering because that was wrong. So I put my attention on other people's suffering, but I couldn't do anything about it. So it just led to this constant frustration. And I know many avatars have the exact same reaction. What can we do? So therefore, when I found the Ascended Master's teachings, and I learned that we can actually do something about it. We can give these decrees to invoke energy. We can call to the Ascended Masters to do various things about the situation. Then that was a huge relief for me. But what I realized when I got the concept of the primal self and the birth trauma was that this, what I saw as empathy, was actually driven by my own birth trauma, my own primal self. Because for me, and I think for many avatars, it wasn't really what the fallen beings did to me that caused the birth trauma, because I could deal with that. Even though they tried to destroy me and make it seem like I'd made a huge mistake, I could deal with that. But it was what they did to other people that shocked me. And that means that basically, when I received the birth trauma, it was this feeling that I can't live with people suffering like this. I can't live on earth as long as people are suffering. And so I created this primal self to find some way I could live with this. And I know this sounds kind of contradictory, but these selves are not necessarily logical. But because I then had this self that couldn't live with people suffering, so I had to, in a sense, suppress the suffering, suppress my experience of people suffering. But then I had another self that said, but you are here, and the only reason you are here is to alleviate the suffering. So you can't just ignore the suffering. So here you have now two selves, classical duality of these separate selves, two selves fighting each other. I can't live with the suffering, so I have to distance myself from it. But you can't completely ignore the suffering because you are here to help people overcome the suffering. So you see, this is how we get in this catch-22. And I think if you look at yourself, you will maybe not the exact same dynamic, but something similar. And so for me, I am absolutely sure I had many past lifetimes where I just completely ignored other people's suffering. I was completely just focused on myself. And this is what you see in the world today. Many, many people are at that stage where they, people in the affluent nations, for example, they ignore that 2/3 of the world's population live in poverty. and they still focus on their daily lives and enjoy their daily lives. And I'm sure I was that way in many lifetimes. But as you walk the spiritual path, which I've done for several lifetimes, you raise your consciousness, and it becomes harder and harder to ignore the suffering. And that's when you then go into various ways to try to overcome the suffering, which could be physically, like, for example, as I talked about, you could fight the fallen beings because you identify it's fallen beings that are causing the suffering, so let's get the fallen beings out of embodiment, or let's try to twist their schemes or expose their schemes or these kind of things. I think I've spent several lifetimes trying to expose what the fallen beings are doing. So, but then you come to a point where you realize that it's not enough with these physical solutions. Even if you could remove the fallen beings, you wouldn't actually remove all suffering on earth. And that's when you then become open to there must be a spiritual solution. And for me, that led to the Ascended Masters. There is a spiritual solution. We invoke the light through decrees. We call the Masters into action. We call forth the judgment of Christ on the fallen beings. And we can improve the situation. And I'm not saying this is invalid. I still look back at all of the years in my second spiritual movement. We had these decree sessions, decree services, where we would be a group of people, sometimes a few hundred, sometimes more. We would decree for 4 hours, these particular decrees. And I was there, I participated in a lot of those, and I really felt it was worth my time. It was worthwhile. It was part of my divine plan to do this. So I'm not in any way discounting it. Giving these decrees and invocations, it definitely has an effect, and for many people it's part of our divine plan to do it. But I came to see that even though it was valid what I was doing, I was still doing it with this attitude that there was something that had gone wrong and I had to correct it. And this put me in this state of tension and frustration, because obviously, you can look at yours and say, well, there's still all this suffering and there's still all these problems. So you can very easily get discouraged, and as you know, discouragement is the sharpest tool in the devil's toolkit. Now they're always trying to project on us as avatars, oh, you can't do what you came for, it's hopeless, planet Earth can't be redeemed, and all this stuff. So when I started realizing this about the birth trauma, I could overcome that frustration by realizing that this is just the outplaying of free will that we're seeing. And when I did that, I overcame this mindset I had before. Because before that, I was very focused on specific physical results that needed to be achieved. And as I've said before, I basically had decided, for example, as long as there's war on Earth, I can't be at peace on Earth. I can't be myself on Earth. And I can't leave Earth. And when I started seeing this, I got to a point where I said, but listen, why should I not be able to be at peace on Earth as long as there's war? Because war is an extreme outplaying of free will. And if people need to see this, why should that prevent me from being at peace? I'm not in that war state of consciousness. I've transcended that level of consciousness. But why should I not allow other people to exercise their free will in such a way that they're still at that level of consciousness? And so I started coming to a point where I could look at Earth and say, well, I can be at peace with this. And I know this leads to a sort of interesting, what can seem like a contradiction. Because I can see in myself that when I was a child, I had this empathy, great empathy with people suffering. I can also see it was obsessive compulsive. It was coming from the primal self and the hurt. I essentially wanted to alleviate other people's suffering to overcome the hurt in myself. So what has happened is since then I have gone through this long process of healing my psychology, and after 2017 when I got these teachings on the birth trauma, really breaking through with the primal self and healing this hurt. So I no longer have the hurt in myself. So I'm not trying to remove people's suffering in order to overcome my own or alleviate my own hurt, my own wound. But I also can see that as part of this process, my empathy has kind of shifted. And I won't say it's gone away, but it's definitely been transformed in the sense that it's no longer an emotional empathy. It's not down here in my emotional body, my solar plexus chakra that's vibrating and I can't live with this is too much, this is terrible. It's almost like I can look at people suffering and I don't have the emotional reaction I used to have. It doesn't mean that I don't care. It doesn't mean that I don't think that this should be overcome. But it's just that I don't feel the frustration that I used to feel. And at this point, I'm not totally clarified about what that means and how I should look at it. It may come to me over time, I assume. But it's still something I'm pondering because on the one hand, you can say the fallen beings have absolutely no empathy for the suffering of human beings. So you're always wondering as an avatar, I don't want to be in the consciousness of the fallen beings. So the fact that my empathy has diminished, does that mean I'm going into the same mindset of the fallen beings and not having empathy with the suffering of human beings? And I don't have a final answer to that other than I can, of course, see that I'm not like the fallen beings causing the suffering of other people. I'm actually trying to remove the cause of the suffering. But it's just that what I feel is that I can't put my mind on people's suffering in the same way I used to do, because I'm realizing, it's almost like what I used to do was I looked at people suffering, through my own wound. And now that I'm not looking at life through that wound, I realized that what I did before was I was pulled into people's suffering and I was looking at their suffering through their wounds, through their mindset. And that I can't allow myself to do anymore. I mean, there's no point in doing it. I can't even really do it because I don't have the wound in myself, so I can't be pulled into other people's wounds. And so it's just shifted that way. It's not that I'm oblivious to the fact that people are suffering, but I just don't have that emotional reaction to it that I used to have. I can see, for example, that for several years I felt fairly at peace with the way things were going on Earth. I was thinking we would gradually move into the golden age. Then came the invasion of Ukraine, and because I've been to Ukraine, I've been to Russia, I know many wonderful people in both Russia and Ukraine, I really felt the hurt, the wound that people were pulled into. But then I had to work with that, and I worked through it, and then when the Hamas-Israeli situation happened, I wasn't pulled into it. I just wasn't pulled into it the same way I was with the Ukraine situation. And you look at this and you're saying, well, does that mean I've become insensitive? But it's not really that I'm insensitive, but it's just that what is there that pulls me into other people's wounds if I don't have a wound in myself? And so I'm still, of course, focused on helping the Earth move towards the golden age of Saint Germain, helping raise the collective consciousness. But I'm just not attached to the outcome. I'm not attached to specific results. And I'm not thinking that it's wrong that people suffer. And I realize this is kind of it's a tough thing, because what am I really saying? When you realize nothing has gone wrong on Earth, that everything is the outplaying of free will, what is it you really realize? You realize that you have to totally respect other people's free will. You can't sit there and be the judge and saying, you shouldn't have made that choice because it led to that consequence that makes you suffer. You can't allow yourself to judge other people's choices and say, if it makes them suffer, it was the wrong choice and they shouldn't have done it. And I should have done something to prevent them from making that choice. Or God should have done something, or the Ascended Master should have done something to prevent people from making the choice that causes them suffering. You can't allow yourself to say that. And you're not saying that anymore because that self is gone. You've let it die. And so you realize that only thing you can do when you're an avatar on Earth is you can observe. You can observe without being attached to a specific outcome, without being pulled into people's hurts. You're just observing. You're neutral. And that's really what has happened to me. I can see I become neutral about other people's suffering. And so you have to say, but Earth is a learning institution. It is, for most people, the school of hard knocks. If I tried to tell them how they could overcome their suffering, they wouldn't listen to me. If the Ascended Masters tried to tell them, they wouldn't listen. So they can only learn from the school of hard knocks. And how do they learn in the school of hard knocks? The knocks have to become so hard they say, I can't do this anymore. That's the only way they learn from the school of hard knocks. It's just a matter of how hard do the knocks have to become. So why should I be emotionally engaged in these groups of people who are just making the knocks harder and harder for themselves, if this is the only way they learn? Why should I be attached to this? Why should I even have a judgment about it? I have to just let things unfold. I can do what I can do. I can make the calls, I can raise my consciousness, I can speak out like I'm doing, but I can't be attached to an outcome. I can't be attached that other people should respond a certain way. I have to say, as I've said, I can only be who I am, I can only express who I am, and let other people be who they see themselves as being right now. That's what I'm doing. I'm being who I see myself as being right at this moment. And so this has at least given me peace, because I can look at this and I can say, I don't need to react to it. I do not need to react to it. And this doesn't mean I'm ignoring people's suffering. It doesn't mean I don't have empathy. But on the other hand, allowing myself to be pulled into their wound, what good does that do them? It just reinforces their wound. It's like the concept you have from psychology. You are enabling somebody to continue a certain behavior. And that's not what we're here to do as avatars. We're here to provide an alternative and demonstrate an alternative. So I'm still not saying this is my final understanding of this. I think there's probably something I will come to see over time. But it could also be helpful to you too, because perhaps you've gone through the same. You have felt that as a spiritual person, you are walking this balance of not ignoring the problems on Earth, but on the other hand, not being pulled into other people's hurt. So I hope this has been helpful to you. It kind of took a different direction that I was envisioning before I started, but that's probably good. So I'll see. Right now I don't see what the next Avatar talk is going to be about, but it's probably going to come to me in a few days. So I hope you'll join me for the next talk. Thank you for watching.